In early January 2026, the world awoke to an announcement that instantly redefined global politics when President Donald J. Trump confirmed that United States military forces had conducted a large-scale overnight operation inside Venezuela, resulting in the capture of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia Flores. A mission that senior U.S. officials described as the culmination of years of intelligence collection focused on dismantling what they allege is one of the most entrenched narco-state networks in the Western Hemisphere, with the operation involving U.S. Special Operations units supported by naval and air assets deployed across the Caribbean region, striking multiple military installations surrounding Caracas before securing the presidential compound and extracting the Venezuelan leader under heavy security, after which both Maduro and Flores were transported to a U.S. Navy vessel and later flown to New York to face sealed federal indictments in the Southern District of New York on charges that include conspiracy to traffic cocaine into the United States, participation in narco-terrorism operations, and misuse of state power to facilitate criminal networks, an unprecedented moment in modern diplomacy that immediately sparked intense legal, political, and humanitarian debate across continents, as President Trump, during a nationally televised address, declared that the United States was now effectively in charge of Venezuela and would oversee what he called a necessary transition period designed to restore stability, security, and democratic governance in a country that for over a decade has been crippled by hyperinflation, political repression, mass migration, and deepening humanitarian collapse, with Trump asserting that American action was justified by the scale of alleged crimes committed under the Maduro government and by the urgent need to disrupt narcotics flows that he says have devastated U.S. communities. Yet critics both in Washington and abroad immediately questioned the legality of a unilateral military action conducted without explicit authorization from the United Nations Security Council or the U.S. Congress, warning that the operation could set a destabilizing precedent, allowing powerful states to remove foreign leaders under the banner of criminal prosecution, a concern echoed by international law scholars who note that sovereign immunity traditionally protects sitting heads of state from arrest by foreign governments, even in the face of serious allegations. While inside Venezuela, state television was briefly taken off air following the strikes, and emergency declarations were issued by interim officials who accused the United States of violating national sovereignty and carrying out what they described as an act of war, though within hours, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez announced that she would temporarily assume leadership functions and expressed willingness to engage with Washington to prevent further bloodshed, a notable shift in tone that suggested deep fractures within the Venezuelan power structure following the dramatic removal of Maduro, while across Latin America reactions varied sharply, with governments in Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia condemning the U.S. action and calling for urgent regional consultations. Cuba reporting casualties among its personnel stationed in Venezuela and accusing Washington of state aggression, and Argentina's libertarian leadership offering qualified support on the grounds that the fall of Maduro could signal the end of one of the hemisphere's most enduring authoritarian regimes. At the United Nations, diplomats prepared for an emergency Security Council session where Russia and China signaled they would challenge the legality of the U.S. operation and warn of far-reaching consequences if the principle of national sovereignty were weakened. While in New York, federal prosecutors moved swiftly to process Maduro and Flores through the U.S. justice system as extraordinary security measures were put in place around the Manhattan courthouse, with officials confirming that the indictments unsealed against them stem from investigations dating back more than a decade that allege a coordinated effort by Venezuelan officials to flood U.S. streets with cocaine while using state institutions to shield traffickers. Charges that Maduro's lawyers have dismissed as politically motivated and lacking jurisdiction, even as Trump's supporters in Congress hailed the operation as the most decisive blow ever delivered against transnational narcotics networks and framed the moment as a historic reassertion of American power in the Americas, a narrative that played heavily across conservative media outlets portraying the capture of Maduro as a turning point comparable to the apprehension of major cartel leaders. Yet within the Democratic Party, concerns mounted over the absence of congressional consultation and the risk of escalating conflict with regional partners, prompting calls for classified briefings and legislation to restrict further military action without legislative approval, while the Pentagon confirmed that U.S. forces had struck several Venezuelan airfields, radar stations, and military barracks during the operation, acknowledging civilian casualties but declining to release full figures pending ongoing assessments. And inside, Caracas residents described a night of explosions, power outages, and chaos as families sheltered in homes while communications were disrupted across large portions of the city. adding to the already dire humanitarian conditions facing millions of Venezuelans who have struggled to access food, medicine, and electricity even before the latest events, conditions that Trump has argued justify temporary U.S. administrative oversight, particularly over Venezuela's vast oil sector, which he says must be restructured to fund reconstruction and stabilize the economy, a statement that has triggered widespread speculation that American energy companies could soon gain expanded access to Venezuelan oil fields, further complicating the geopolitical implications of the operation, while Trump also hinted during follow-up remarks that future actions could extend beyond Venezuela if neighboring states such as Colombia or Cuba were found to be facilitating narcotics trafficking or harboring hostile actors, language that immediately unsettled regional governments and raised fears of a broader U.S. interventionist posture in the Caribbean basin, as analysts warn that while the removal of Maduro may weaken one of the hemisphere's most isolated regimes, it could also ignite nationalist backlash, insurgent activity, and prolonged instability if a legitimate and inclusive transition process is not established. And as the world now watches the unfolding court proceedings in New York and the fragile political recalibration underway in Caracas, the full consequences of this extraordinary moment remain impossible to predict, with supporters celebrating what they see as the fall of a corrupt strongman and critics cautioning that the precedent set by his capture may reverberate through international relations for decades to come, reshaping how power, law, and sovereignty are contested in the 21st century.